Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he had sat down, his disciples came to him. He began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you falsely because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven." The Gospel of the Lord. As many of you here in the Basilica know, but perhaps our virtual viewers do not, I have a side gig as the director of our college seminary here on campus. And a few years ago, I invited an old friend of mine to give a retreat to the college seminarians. And this friend has had a pretty accomplished career. He's worked at the USCCB for a number of years in a variety of positions, including as the general secretary. So over one of our meals at this retreat, he was telling stories about his time at the USCCB, and one of them involved going to Rome and meeting with the various dicasteries and eventually having lunch with St. John Paul II to plan World Youth Day 1994, which, for those of you old enough to remember, we hosted here in Denver. About a quarter way through this story, just as he was explaining the intricacies of lunch with the Holy Father at the Apostolic Palace, one of the college seminarians drops his fork, looks up at him with awe, and simply says, "You had lunch with my confirmation saint." It was a moment of remarkable clarity for him. That this saint who had meant so much to him, who provided such great inspiration and was so essential that he decided to choose him as a patron for confirmation, that person in that moment became a lot more real, a lot more concrete, a lot more human. That he wasn't some mythical figure that you read about in books, but was very truly one of us. And it's that recognition of saints' humanity that makes today's celebration so important and so special. Because, friends, it's true, it can be easy for us to look at the lives of the saints, to look at the figures in these windows whose stories we know so well, and it's easy for us to be captured by their exciting lives, by their dramatic deaths, by the exciting and dramatic stories we know of them all, some of which are depicted here. And in that sense, we can easily give them almost mythical status in our life. But that status can often put them out of reach for us. And in that moment, when that particular college seminarian realized that one of his beloved saints was also just a human being like him, it all comes together. The saints, like us, had to eat and drink. They had to sleep, be nourished. They were happy, but also sad. And they too, just like us, just like all other human beings, are people who struggled with sin and temptation, people who struggled to live the life that God called them to, people who struggled to discern day in and day out how the Lord's life was calling them to act in their own. What's important for us to remember is that the saints didn't have some special power or competitive edge. They didn't have a secret formula or some sort of hidden knowledge that gave them a boost over the rest of us. Rather, they were just like you and me. Human beings, men and women, who simply and earnestly sought to live the gospel in their life. That's all. And in fact, today's celebration is meant to recognize not the sort of saints we see in the windows whose names appear in the canon and whose lives we know from butlers, but rather all those other saints whose stories are a bit more mundane, whose lives were perhaps a bit more ordinary, but whose lives were no less holy. Those men and women whose lives perhaps looked a bit more like ours, mothers and fathers, old and young, carpenters and lawyers and teachers and sinners, their lives remind us that sanctity is not a goal for a spiritually elite class of people in the church, but rather that sanctity is the goal for each and every one of us. All of us are called to be saints. All of us are called to be holy. And we are called because God has made each of us holy by creating us in his own image and in his own likeness. And it's his gift of sanctity in our lives that invites us and calls us to consider how we might use those gifts in his service and in the service of our brothers and sisters. God has made each of us holy, friends. The question is, for us, how is it we live that holiness out? How do we make that holiness present in our thoughts, in our words, in our actions? How do we meet the goal that God has given to each and one of us? The good news, friends, is that God has not left us alone, and in fact, in today's gospel leaves us a roadmap to holiness, a guide to being one of his holy ones. In the Beatitude, God shows us and calls us how to leave ourselves and seek his holiness each and every day. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are they who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful, the clean of heart, the peacemakers. God shows us and demonstrates for us what it means. What it means for us to be holy. What it means and what it looks like for us to be saints. And what's clear in the text of the Beatitudes is that our sanctity comes not from seeking all to ourselves, but by abandoning ourselves in the service of our brothers and sisters, by being humble, by being empathetic, by being self-sacrificial, by being merciful and compassionate, charitable, chaste. It's our desire to live for others that allows us to live for God and to share in the life that He calls us to. Reading the Beatitudes is one thing, but they're a little bit harder to live out in real life. So perhaps what the Lord calls us to consider this morning is how it is we seek to be holy in our day-to-day lives. How is it that we are learning to be saints? And I'll admit, this week is probably going to be a pretty large test. There's no doubt that in the next 7 days, if not more, there will be much anger, much frustration, more than a few unkind words. There will be much division and hostility and disunity. And it will be easy for us to fall into all those tides. But friends, in this moment, it's important to remember that what God calls us to this week and always. What God calls us to is not to be a Republican or a Democrat, not to be a supporter of one candidate or the other. What God calls us to is holiness. What God calls us to be is a saint. And so in the midst of much temptation in the next few weeks, let us be encouraged by the many men and women who have gone before us and walked the life of holiness. Let us ask their intercession for our charity, for our civility, for our ability to give of ourselves and serve and seek to serve others. And may their holiness encourage us to live as saints all the days of our life.